She had made herself small for so long that she had nearly forgotten there was anything larger to be. Susannah Bramwell stood at the edge of the Stonecross drawing room on a gray October morning, holding a damp cloth and a child she had not been asked to hold, while her younger sister smiled across the room at a man who had not yet looked at Susannah once. That was as it should be. That was, in every practical sense, the arrangement. The Duke of Wycombe had come to inspect Phoebe, and Phoebe was inspectable. 20 years old, bright as new copper, dressed in her best muslin with her hair done by the Netherby Lodge maid who had some idea of fashion. Susannah was 38, wearing the gray wool she wore to everything, and the child in her arms had just pressed jam-covered fingers against her collar. She was trying to clean both of them up quietly, kneeling on the floor near the window, when the room went still in a way that rooms sometimes do. And she looked up to find the Duke of Wycombe looking directly at her. He was not what she had expected. She had pictured someone older or more self-satisfied, or at least more occupied with the business of inspecting Phoebe. He was tall and dark-haired, with the kind of face that had been handsome once, and had since been rearranged by weather and some private form of fatigue into something more interesting than handsome. He had been mid-sentence when his eyes found her. She could tell because the sentence simply stopped, the way a man stops walking when he steps on unexpected ground. And Lady Pelham, who had been managing the room with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had managed rooms all her life, did not immediately notice. Phoebe noticed. Phoebe's smile held its shape with the discipline of a girl who had been rehearsing this afternoon for 6 weeks. But something shifted behind her eyes. The Duke said, flat and direct, without the courtesy of pretending he had not been staring. "And who are you?" The question landed in the room like a dropped glass. Lady Pelham turned. Her expression did not change. She was too accomplished for that. But the quality of her attention sharpened into something that Susannah recognized immediately, because she had been on the receiving end of it for 16 years. "I do beg your pardon," Susannah said. She rose from the floor, the child still on her hip, and kept her voice level. "I am Susannah Bramwell, Miss Bramwell's elder sister. I was only attending to your daughter, Your Grace. I did not mean to interrupt." She moved toward the door with Emmy, intending to remove herself from the center of proceedings entirely. Because that was what she did. She removed herself. And she had nearly reached the edge of the room when the Duke said, still in that same flat voice, "You haven't interrupted anything." It was not an invitation. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered without social ornament, and she did not know what to do with it. She stopped moving but did not turn around. "Miss Bramwell," Lady Pelham said, with the particular brightness she reserved for redirecting conversations that were going the wrong direction, "perhaps you might take Emmeline to the nursery now. I believe Mrs. Holt is waiting." "Of course," Susannah said. She went. From where he stood, Marcus Severn, 5th Duke of Wycombe, watched her leave and was aware of something he could not immediately name. He'd been in this room for 20 minutes, saying the correct things to Lady Pelham and the correct things to Miss Phoebe Bramwell, who was very young and very pretty, and who looked at him with the careful brightness of someone performing a part they had learned but did not entirely believe. He had said the correct things because the correct things were what he did. He had come to Stonecross because the Dowager Marchioness of Crowhurst had written to him in terms that were not, technically, a command, but which had the legal weight of one. He had looked at Phoebe Bramwell and thought, she will do. She was young. She was presentable. She was not unkind. She would, presumably, give him the male heir the Dowager required in exchange for releasing her hold on Emmy's settlement, and the whole business would be resolved with the minimum of personal disruption to everyone involved. Then his eyes had found the woman on the floor. She had been entirely absorbed in the child, his daughter, who did not take to strangers and had been known to scream for an hour when the nursemaid at Stonecross attempted to handle her. Emmy was not screaming. Emmy was leaning her head against the woman's shoulder with the boneless trust of a child who has decided, in the absolute way of children, that this person is safe. The woman had been speaking quietly to her, something low and practical about the jam. And she had not looked up when he entered the room, which meant she was either unaware that a duke had arrived, or she did not consider it her business. He had found himself staring at the back of her neck, at the gray wool that was not fashionable, at the steadiness of her hands. And then she had looked up, and he had asked his question, and she had answered it with a composure that had a particular quality to it. Not the composure of a woman who felt nothing, but the composure of a woman who had learned to feel things privately and not trouble anyone with the results. He watched her disappear through the door with Emmy still on her hip and thought, that was the first real thing that has happened to me in months. He turned back to Phoebe Bramwell and said the next correct thing, and she smiled the correct smile, and the afternoon continued as arranged. Lady Pelham addressed Susannah twice more before the visit concluded. The first time was in front of the assembled company. The Duke, Phoebe, the Stonecross housekeeper who had been summoned to discuss the arrangements for a future stay, and two other ladies of the neighborhood who had been invited to lend the occasion an air of social ease. Lady Pelham turned to Susannah, who had returned without Emmy and taken up a position near the window that was neither quite in the room nor quite out of it, and said, "Susannah, you are blocking the light. Come and sit here where you won't be in anyone's way." The chair she indicated was the smallest in the room and positioned with its back to the conversation. Susannah moved to it without expression. The second time was when the tea things had not arrived promptly enough, and Lady Pelham said, without interrupting her own conversation with the Duke, "Susannah, do go and see what is keeping Marsden." Susannah went. She stood in the corridor outside the kitchen for a moment longer than was necessary, listening to the muffled sound of the room behind her, the light social voices, the careful performance of a courtship that had nothing to do with her. And then she straightened her spine and went to find Marsden. The carriages were brought round at 4:30. The afternoon light had gone thin and gray, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly provisional, and the steps outside the Stonecross entrance were damp from an earlier rain. Lady Pelham was already organizing the departure with her usual efficiency, directing Phoebe toward the Duke so that he might hand her into the carriage, which was the point of the exercise. Another small moment of proximity, another thread in the arrangement being woven. Marcus moved toward the steps. His hand came out automatically toward the woman nearest to him, and the woman nearest to him was Susannah. He caught himself. He was aware, in the half-second before he corrected the gesture, that he had not corrected it out of social instinct, but out of something slower and more deliberate. An actual decision made consciously to redirect his hand toward Phoebe where it was supposed to go. But he had already made contact. Susannah's hand was in his for that half-second, and then she was withdrawing it, and he did not release it quite at the moment he should have. He held it, not tightly, not with any declaration, just a fraction of a second longer than courtesy required. Long enough for her to notice. Long enough for him to feel the steadiness of her hand in his. And then, the deliberate, composed way she withdrew it. She did not look at him. She moved aside to allow him to hand Phoebe into the carriage, and she climbed in after her sister without assistance, as though the moment had not happened. In the carriage, jolting back along the road to Netherby Lodge, Phoebe leaned close and whispered. "He held your hand." "He made an error of manners," Susannah said. "He meant to hand you in. I was simply in the way." Phoebe looked at her for a moment, with an expression Susannah did not examine closely enough to read. "Of course," Phoebe said, and turned to look out the window. The letter from the Dowager Marchioness of Crowhurst arrived at Stonecross Hall on a Wednesday morning, while Marcus was in his study attempting to review the quarterly accounts and finding that the numbers kept rearranging themselves in his mind into something that had nothing to do with money. He read the letter standing up, which was how he read things he expected to dislike. The Dowager was precise, as she always was. She had reviewed the terms of the settlement that governed Emmeline's maintenance and guardianship. The settlement that had been drawn up at the time of his marriage to her daughter Caroline, and which had been carefully constructed to ensure that the Dowager retained certain powers of oversight in the event of Caroline's death. Marcus had understood those terms at the time. He had not, at 26, fully understood what they would cost him. The letter made clear that the extended visit to Stonecross was not a social suggestion. The Bramwell women, Miss Phoebe Bramwell as the prospective bride, Miss Susannah Bramwell as chaperone, and, the Dowager noted with characteristic efficiency, the only adult Emmeline had shown any willingness to obey, were to be installed at Stonecross for the formal courtship period. The Dowager expected the matter to be resolved before the harvest dinner. She expected an announcement. Marcus set the letter on his desk. He opened the drawer to his left and removed the settlement papers. 40 pages of legal language that reduced his daughter's security to a series of conditions, all of which the Dowager controlled. He read the relevant clause again, though he did not need to. He had read it many times. He sat with the papers for a long while, looking at nothing in particular. Then he drafted the invitation to Lady Pelham, sealed it, and sent it with the morning rider. Lady Pelham's acceptance arrived before supper. Marcus was not surprised. He had understood from the first afternoon in that drawing room that Lady Pelham had staked everything on this match, that the roof over both Bramwell sisters and whatever remained of their respectability were all balanced on the same fulcrum as Phoebe's marriage prospects. He was not unsympathetic to the pressure. He simply could not afford to be governed by it. In the servants' quarters of Netherby Lodge, Susannah received the news of the extended visit not as an invitation, but as a set of instructions, because that was how information arrived for her. Lady Pelham told her in the morning briskly, while Susannah was already dressed and had already decided that the most useful thing she could do was begin organizing Phoebe's trunk. She packed Phoebe's better dresses, the pale blue that suited her, the ivory muslin, the green wool for colder evenings. She packed Phoebe's good slippers and the shawl that had been their mother's. She folded everything with the care of a woman who understands that fabric, properly handled, lasts longer than it should. For herself, she packed 2 changes of clothing and her mending. She did not pack the one decent gown she owned, the dark green silk she had worn twice in 10 years, because she did not expect anyone to notice what she wore, and it would only be in the way. The first fortnight at Stonecross established a pattern so quickly that it began to feel like the house had always been arranged this way. Marcus would find her in the mornings, walking with Emmy in the walled garden while the dew was still on the grass. He would fall into step beside her, and she would answer his questions about Emmy with the quiet precision of someone who had been paying close attention. And then she would say, "Phoebe was asking about the South Terrace. She thought the view from there must be lovely in this weather. Perhaps you might show her after breakfast." He would look at her for a moment. She would not look back. At table, he directed remarks toward her, specific questions, the kind that require actual thought to answer. not the social weather remarks that could be deflected to anyone. She deflected them to Phoebe anyway, physically turning her body slightly in her sister's direction, as though she were a mirror angled to catch his gaze and redirected. He noticed. He said nothing. On the 5th day, he tried a different approach. He asked her, at breakfast, what she had read recently. "Phoebe has been reading Mrs. Radcliffe," Susannah said. "She finds her very entertaining." "Do you enjoy Gothic fiction, Your Grace?" "I asked what you had read," Marcus said. A pause. Brief, but there. "Cowper," she said, "and some of the agricultural reports from the board. Your library has an excellent collection of them." He looked at her. "You were reading agricultural reports." "The rotation system described in the 1802 volume is quite interesting. I wondered whether it might apply to the North Field at Netherby, but of course, that is not my decision to make." He opened his mouth to respond, and Lady Pelham said from the far end of the table, "Susannah, do try not to bore His Grace with farm management." The table accepted this. There was a small, comfortable ripple of amusement, the kind that costs nothing and affirms the existing order of things. Marcus set down his cup. He stood, not dramatically, not with any announcement, and crossed the room in 6 even steps, arriving beside Susannah's chair. He turned and looked at the table. He said nothing. He simply stood there, in the deliberate way of a man who has decided that his presence is a statement, and let the attention of every person in the room follow him to where he had placed himself, beside the woman who had just been told she was boring. The table went quiet. Lady Pelham's expression did not change, but something in her posture recalibrated. Susannah looked at the tablecloth. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she did not move them. "Tell me more about the rotation system," Marcus said to her in a tone that was simply his normal tone, flat, direct, expecting an answer. She looked up at him then. Just for a moment. Something moved across her face that was not quite surprise and not quite belief, more like a person hearing a sound in a language they were told they would never be taught. Then she looked back down and began to speak about crop rotation, quietly and with considerable knowledge. And he stood beside her and listened. He found her in the walled garden at the end of August, in the last of the warm light, when the roses had gone over and the air smelled of something richer and darker than summer. He had followed her. He was aware of that. He had watched her leave the house after supper and had given it 10 minutes before following, which was long enough to be deliberate and not long enough to be sensible. She was standing near the far wall, looking at nothing in particular, and she heard him coming because the gravel was loud under his boots, and she did not turn around. "Miss Bramwell," he said. She turned then, and he could see that she had arranged her face into its usual composure, the one that was so habitual by now it probably happened without her noticing. "Your Grace." She turned then, and he could see that she had arranged her face into its usual composure, the one that was so habitual by now it probably happened without her noticing. "I was just about to come in. The evening is getting cold." "It isn't cold yet," he said. "And I have a question." She waited. "Why?" Marcus said. "Do you spend every hour in this house redirecting my attention away from yourself?" The composure held, but something behind it shifted. He could see it in the way her hands stopped moving against her skirt, in the way she became very still. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "You do," he said. "Every question I ask you, you turn toward Phoebe. Every time I cross a room in your direction, you find a reason to step aside. This morning at breakfast, you moved your chair. I saw you do it, so that I would have to look past you to see her. Phoebe is the reason you are here, Susannah said. I am the chaperone. It is my function to ensure that your attention goes where it is supposed to go. And where is it supposed to go? To my sister. She said it without drama, as a simple statement of geography. You came for Phoebe. The survival of my family depends on that courtship proceeding. Lady Pelham has made the terms very clear. If this match does not happen, we lose everything. The house, what remains of the money, Phoebe's dowry, any future shelter either of us has. I am 38 years old. I am poor. I am plain in the way of women whom no one has looked at for a long time, and I have been the household's unpaid servant for 16 years. It is not possible that your interest is what it appears to be. And if it were, if you were somehow confused about where you were supposed to be looking, it would be my duty to correct that confusion before it ruined my sister's only chance. She stopped. She had said more than she intended. He could see that in the slight change in her breathing. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he said, I have never in my life managed to want what I was supposed to want. Silence. That is not a comfortable thing to discover about yourself, he continued. I married Caroline Crowhurst because my family required it, and because I was 26 and had not yet understood that requirements and choices are different things. I came here for Phoebe because the Dowager holds a legal instrument over my daughter's future that I have not yet found a way around. I have been executing arrangements since I was old enough to sign documents. And then I walked into a drawing room and found a woman on the floor cleaning jam off my daughter's chin, and I could not finish my sentence. He took a step toward her. She did not step back, but he saw the effort that cost her. He raised his hand and took her chin, gently, and tilted her face up until her eyes met his. She dropped her gaze immediately. He held the position, waiting, until she made the choice to raise it again herself. And she did, after a long moment, with something that was not defeat and not surrender, but something more careful than either. He held her gaze. She held his. He released her. He stepped back. She stood very still for a long moment, with the last of the August light on her face. And then she turned and walked back toward the house without speaking. He stayed in the garden until dark. Emmy's fever began in the late evening of a Thursday in September, the kind of fever that arrives fast and climbs without apology. The nursemaid, a capable enough woman in ordinary circumstances, came apart entirely at the sight of the child's flushed face and the speed with which the thermometer registered the alarm. And by the time Marcus had been summoned from his study and the physician sent for from the village, the situation in the nursery had deteriorated from urgent to frightening. Susannah was already there. She had heard Emmy cry out from the corridor. She had been walking back from the library. And she had not hesitated. She was in the room before the nursemaid had stopped wringing her hands, and she had taken in the scene with the swift assessment of a woman who had managed illness without help before. Cold cloths, she said to the nursemaid. Clean ones, wrung out properly. And water, cool, not cold. Bring the basin from the washstand. She was already at the bedside, her hand on Emmy's forehead, her voice dropping into the low, steady register she used with the child. I'm here, sweetheart. I have you. Sus, Emmy said, which was what she called her. Sus, my head hurts. I know it does. We're going to make it better. Marcus arrived to find Susannah already working. Cloths changed every few minutes, Emmy's nightgown loosened, A measured dose of the physician's powder that had been kept in the nursery cabinet, dissolved in water and administered with the patience of a woman who understood that a feverish child will not be rushed. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching, and then he came in and rolled up his sleeves and asked what she needed him to do. She told him, and he did it. And they worked together through the evening and into the night without ceremony. The physician came and went. He confirmed what Susannah had already begun treating, adjusted one element of the dose, and said the words that physicians say when they cannot promise anything. That the fever must break on its own, that they must watch the breathing, that the night would tell them what the morning would look like. Near midnight, Emmy fell into a restless sleep. Marcus sat on the far side of the bed. Susannah sat on the near side. The candle between them had burned down to a stub, and someone had brought a new one without either of them noticing. "Tell me about her," Susannah said quietly, not looking up from Emmy. "Your wife, her mother." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I barely knew her." "I know. We were married in April. She was 22. I was told she was gentle and well-bred, which she was, and that the match was sensible, which it was, by every measure of anyone in my family used to measure things." He paused. "I liked her. I want to say that clearly. She was a good person, and I liked her, and I never loved her, and I think she knew that. And I think she was too well-bred to say so." Susannah looked up then. "She died in October," Marcus said. 6 months. Emmy came early, and Caroline did not survive it. I stood outside a door I had not been invited through. The physician said there was nothing to be done, and the dowager was inside, and no one opened the door to tell me what was happening until it was over. He turned his hand over on the coverlet. "The dowager has been managing the terms of my life ever since. The settlement gives her oversight of Emmy's maintenance and guardianship in the event that I remarry without her approval. She has made it clear that her approval requires a young wife who can provide a male heir, a woman she considers suitable. She wrote it into the document because she did not trust me to choose correctly, and I signed it because I was 26 and grieving and did not understand what I was signing away." Emmy stirred between them. Susannah adjusted the cloth on Emmy's forehead with one hand. "You are not a man choosing a bride," Susannah said. "You are a man in a cage trying to find the door." "Yes," he said. "That is exactly what I am." Their hands met on the coverlet, over Emmy, and neither of them moved away. The candle burned. The clock on the mantel measured out the small hours in quiet strokes. Near 4 in the morning, the quality of Emmy's breathing changed. Susannah felt it before she could name it. Something in the rhythm, something easing. She pressed the back of her hand to the child's forehead, and the heat had dropped, not gone but retreating, the fever beginning to give ground. She let out a breath she had been holding for hours. "It's breaking," she said. Marcus leaned forward and looked at his daughter's face. The flush diminished, the tight lines around her eyes loosening into something closer to real sleep. Something in his expression did something that Susannah looked away from, because it was too private to witness. He said, rough-voiced, when he had recovered himself, "She asked for you when the nursemaid came to fetch me. She didn't ask for Mrs. Holt. She asked for you." Susannah said nothing. She looked at Emmy's sleeping face. "Not the nursemaid," Marcus said. "You." Susannah sat back in the chair. The relief and the exhaustion arrived at the same moment, and she let them. She was still holding his hand, she realized. Or he was still holding hers. She was not certain which. It did not seem important to determine. She was asleep within minutes, in the chair, with his hands still folded around hers. He did not withdraw it. Lady Pelham came to Susannah's room 3 days after Emmy's recovery, in the morning, while Phoebe was still asleep and the house was quiet. She closed the door behind her and stood in the center of the small room that had been given to Susannah, the one at the end of the corridor, the narrowest, the one with the view of the kitchen garden rather than the park. And she looked at Susannah with the expression of a woman who has made a calculation and arrived at an answer she does not like, but intends to act on regardless. "I am going to say this plainly," Lady Pelham said. "The Duke is not looking at Phoebe." "He is very attentive to Phoebe," Susannah said. "He is attentive to Phoebe in the way a man is attentive to a task he has been set. He looks at you the way a man looks at something he cannot stop thinking about. And I have been watching men look at women for 40 years, and I know the difference." Lady Pelham paused. "I am not angry with you. I am telling you what is at stake." "I know what is at stake." "Then hear me clearly." Lady Pelham's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "If this marriage does not happen, if you allow whatever is developing between you and the Duke to derail this courtship, I will withdraw everything. The house, what remains of the money, Phoebe's dowry. I will remove both of you from my roof and my support, and you will have nothing. No reference, no shelter, no future. You will have made yourself the ruin of your sister's life." She let that sit for a moment. "I do not want to do that. I am telling you I will." After she left, Susannah sat on the edge of the narrow bed for a long time. That same afternoon, the Dowager's letter arrived at Stonecross. Not for Susannah, but the news of it reached her through the house's ordinary channels of information, the way news always reached her. The Dowager had fixed the date. The harvest dinner, 3 weeks hence, would be the occasion for the formal announcement of the engagement. 3 weeks. That evening, Susannah sat with Phoebe in Phoebe's room while Phoebe brushed her hair, and they talked about ordinary things for a while. Emmy's recovery, the changing color of the park, whether the green wool gown needed its hem let down. And then Phoebe set down the brush and put her face in her hands. "I cannot do it," Phoebe said. Susannah waited. "I have tried," Phoebe said. "I have tried very hard to do it properly. And he is not unkind, and I know what it means for us if I don't, and I cannot." She looked up. Her eyes were red. "There is someone else. There has been someone else for 2 years. Mr. Reeve, you've met him, the curate at St. Michael's. I know he has nothing. I know it's impossible. I know that is exactly the kind of match that Aunt Pelham would call foolish and ruinous. And I love him, Susannah. I have tried to stop and I cannot stop." Susannah looked at her sister's face, the face she had been protecting since Phoebe was 4 years old, since their father's debts had come due and their mother had gone to bed and not gotten up again. And Susannah had understood, at 22, that she was now the person responsible for everyone else. "Why didn't you tell me?" Susannah asked. "Because I knew what you would do," Phoebe said. "You would find a way to fix it for me. You always find a way to fix it, and I didn't want to add another thing you had to carry." Susannah stood and went to the window. There was a household in the next county. She had seen the advertisement 3 weeks ago in the newspaper that came to Stonecross on Tuesdays. A governess wanted. The position was modest, but the terms were clear. She had thought about it then and set it aside. She took it out now and looked at it properly. She went to the writing desk and wrote the letter that night, before she could think herself out of it. She described her qualifications, And they were genuine. 16 years of managing a household and educating a younger sister and a brother had given her qualifications that most governess positions would be grateful for. She sealed the letter before she could reconsider. She would leave after the harvest dinner. She would remove herself from the situation she had become, and Phoebe could tell the Duke the truth about Mr. Reeve, and the whole arrangement would collapse cleanly without her in the middle of it. Lady Pelham would be furious. But Lady Pelham's fury was something Susannah had survived before. She did not pack her trunk that night. She would do it quietly, the morning of the dinner, while everyone was occupied with preparations. She went to bed and did not sleep. He found her in the walled garden the evening before the harvest dinner. The garden was dark by 6 o'clock now, the October dark that arrives with authority, and she was standing near the wall where the last of the climbing roses had gone to hips, her arms folded against the cold. She had not brought a shawl, which meant she had not expected to stay, which meant she had come out here to think and had not noticed the cold arriving. Upstairs, in the narrow room at the end of the corridor, her trunk was packed. "You're cold," Marcus said. "I'm perfectly well," Susannah said. He removed his coat and put it around her shoulders without asking, which was the sort of thing he did. Direct and practical, and without the social theater of making a gesture of it. She did not remove it. "I know about the letter," he said. She turned to look at him. "Which letter?" "The governess position, in the next county. Mrs. Alderton's household." He watched her face. "My housekeeper mentioned that you had sent a letter with a Tuesday rider. I made an inquiry. I am not apologizing for that." "You had no right?" "No," he said. "I didn't. And you were going to disappear without telling anyone. So I think we can agree that we have both behaved without complete transparency." He paused. "I intend to refuse the match tomorrow, at the dinner, before the Dowager can announce it." The cold arrived properly then, or she felt it properly. She turned to face him. "You cannot," she said. "I have decided that I can." "Then you haven't calculated what it costs." Her voice was steady, but there was something in it that had not been there before. Not the careful composure she deployed like a tool, but something rawer and more urgent. "The Dowager controls Emmy's settlement. If you refuse this match without her approval, she invokes the oversight clause. Emmy's maintenance, her guardianship arrangements, everything the Dowager built into that document, all of it becomes contested. You know what that means for Emmy. I know what it means. Then you know you cannot do it. Susannah." He said her name, just that, and it stopped her. "I have spent 15 years doing what I was supposed to do. I signed documents I should not have signed. I married a woman I could not love because my family required it. And she died. And I have been paying that debt ever since to a woman who uses my daughter's security as a lever to keep me in line. I am not willing to pay it anymore." He looked at her in the dark, steadily, with the particular quality of attention she had been trying to deflect for 2 months. "I know what it costs. I have calculated it. I have decided the calculation is wrong." She stood very still. He kissed her then, once, slowly, in the dark garden, with his hands on either side of her face and the October cold around them, and the house lit up behind the wall. Not a question, not an experiment, a statement, delivered with the same flat certainty he brought to everything he meant. She did not redirect it. She did not withdraw. When he stepped back, she said nothing. She stood in his coat, in the dark, with the last roses behind her. And she looked at him with an expression he could not fully read. Something between grief and something much larger than grief. Something that had not had occasion to exist in her face for a long time. He touched her cheek once, briefly, and went back inside. She stood in the garden for a long time before she followed. The harvest dinner at Stonecross was attended by 43 people, which was the right number for an occasion that was supposed to feel celebratory rather than ceremonial, and which was actually neither. The table was dressed with the autumn's produce, gourds and late apples and branches of copper beech, and the candles were lit before dark because the evenings came early now. The Dowager Marchioness of Crowhurst sat at the table's right hand, small and upright, in black silk, with the expression of a woman who has managed a great many dinners and knows exactly when to rise. Susannah sat at the table's edge, as she always did, near enough to be present in her function as chaperone, far enough to be invisible in every other sense. She was wearing the dark green silk. She had taken it out of the trunk that morning without quite deciding to, and she had put it on without quite deciding to, and she had not looked at herself in the mirror when she was done. Phoebe sat 3 places to the Duke's left, pale and composed, and doing what she had always done, performing a part she had learned and did not believe. The dinner proceeded through its courses. The conversation was general and social and careful, the way conversation is when everyone in the room is aware that something is about to happen and no one is acknowledging it. The Dowager waited until the last of the dessert plates had been cleared, and then she set down her wine glass with the particular deliberateness of a woman about to rise. Marcus rose first. The room noticed immediately. The movement was controlled and unhurried, but it had the quality of a man who has decided something and is not going to be interrupted. 43 people looked at him. "I must ask for the company's indulgence for a moment," Marcus said, in his ordinary voice, the one that did not perform. "There has been an expectation this evening that I am obliged to correct. There will be no engagement announced tonight. Not with Miss Phoebe Bramwell, to whom I owe an apology and a debt of gratitude in equal measure. She has conducted herself with more grace than this situation deserved." The room was very quiet. "The woman I intend to marry," Marcus said, "is Miss Susannah Bramwell." Phoebe closed her eyes briefly and then opened them, and the expression on her face was not devastation. It was something much closer to relief. Lady Pelham went the color of old wax. The Dowager rose. She rose in the way of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this, who has known it was possible and prepared accordingly. Her voice was precise and carried without effort across the silent room. "I must observe," the Dowager said, "that His Grace appears to have forgotten the terms of the settlement governing his daughter's welfare. The oversight clause is clear. If the Duke remarries without the consent of the Marchioness, which is to say, without my consent, the question of Emmeline's guardianship and maintenance becomes a matter for legal review. I have been patient. I have been accommodating. But I cannot allow a man who would make this choice to be considered a fit and reliable guardian for my granddaughter." She paused. "I am sure the assembled company understands my position." Lady Pelham made a small sound that was almost satisfaction. Susannah stood up. It was not a dramatic movement. She rose from the edge of the table the way she did everything, quietly, without announcement. And she said, "Your Grace, might I have a private word?" The Dowager looked at her with the assessing gaze of a woman who has spent a lifetime measuring threats and dismissing those that do not qualify. Susannah Bramwell did not by any visible measure qualify. She was a woman in a silk gown she had worn twice in 10 years, sitting at the edge of a table she had not been properly invited to. "I do not believe we have been introduced," the dowager said. "We have not," Susannah said. "I am the woman who sat beside your granddaughter through the night her fever nearly killed her. I would like 5 minutes of your time." A pause. Something moved in the dowager's eyes. Not softness, but attention. She inclined her head, and Susannah moved around the table and through the door at the far end of the room. And after a moment, the dowager followed. The small sitting room off the dining room was cold and unlit. Susannah did not wait for a lamp. She turned to face the dowager in the light that came through the open door, and she spoke without preamble. "Your daughter died," Susannah said. "I know that. I know what it is to lose people, and to spend the rest of your life arranging things so that nothing that remains can be taken from you. You built that settlement because you loved Caroline, and because you did not trust a man you barely knew to protect what was left of her, which was Emmy. I understand that." The dowager said nothing. "Emmy almost died 3 weeks ago," Susannah said. "The fever came fast and it climbed fast, and the physician said the night would tell us what the morning would look like. Marcus sat beside her for 9 hours. He held her hand, and he talked to her, and he did not leave the room. And I was there, and I can tell you that what kept that child alive through the night was not a dynastic arrangement or a settlement clause or the prospect of a male heir. It was love. The kind that stays in a room at 3 in the morning and does not count the cost." She stopped. She let the dowager sit with that. "Your pressure on him," Susannah said more quietly now, "is the condition that put Emmy at risk. A man being managed into a marriage he does not want, for reasons that have nothing to do with his daughter's actual welfare, is a man whose attention is divided. His attention was not divided that night. It was entirely on Emmy." She paused. "I am not asking you to approve of me. I am asking you what your daughter would have wanted for her child, not a correct arrangement, not a legal instrument. What Caroline would have wanted." The silence lasted a long time. The dowager was looking at the dark window. Her hands were folded in front of her, and something in the set of her shoulders had changed, not collapsed, but reconfigured, the way things reconfigure when a weight is shifted. "She would have wanted the child loved," the dowager said at last. Her voice was careful, but it was honest. "That is what she would have wanted." "Yes," Susannah said. "I thought so." Another silence. "I will need to review the settlement terms," the dowager said. "I understand." "It will take time. There are legal questions." "There are always legal questions," Susannah said. "But you are the one who built the instrument, and you are the one who can choose how to use it." The dowager looked at her for a long moment, the first time, Susannah thought, that anyone of consequence had looked at her for a long moment, found something worth looking at. "You are not what I expected," the dowager said. "I rarely am," Susannah said. They went back into the room. The dowager took her seat. She did not invoke the clause again. She did not speak for a long time, and when she did, it was to ask the housekeeper for more wine, which was as close to a concession as she was likely to make in public. Lady Pelham looked between the dowager's silence and Marcus's steady expression, and understood that something had shifted in a direction she could not reverse. Her mouth pressed into a thin line and stayed there. Marcus turned to Phoebe, who was sitting very still with her hands in her lap. "I owe you a conversation," he said, "and an apology, and if you will permit it, something more practical than either." He paused. "There is a church living that falls under the Stonecross estate, St. Michael's, as it happens. The current curate's position would benefit considerably from a settled income and a proper residence. I intend to arrange that. I also intend to provide for your family, without condition, regardless of what you choose to do next." Phoebe looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Reeve is a very good man." "I expect he is," Marcus said. "You have good judgment." Lady Pelham made a sound that was not quite a word. The dinner concluded. The guests departed with the careful expressions of people who had witnessed something they would discuss for months. Lady Pelham left without speaking to Susannah, which was, Susannah understood, a form of answer. Not the withdrawal of everything, because the threat had lost its leverage, but a silence that would require time to become something more. Later that evening, after the house had grown quiet and Emmy had been checked on and found sleeping soundly, a door at the end of the upper corridor opened and then closed with the soft certainty of something decided. The morning came in gray and gold through the Stonecross dining room windows, the particular light of an autumn morning that has decided to be kind. The fire was already lit. The table was set for two, and then a third place, because Emmy had taken to appearing at breakfast before the household was properly assembled. She appeared now, running, because she always ran, her dark hair loose and her stockings already crooked. And she stopped in the doorway, in the way of a child who has registered something new and is taking it in. Susannah and Marcus were at the table together, not performing anything, simply there, his hand near hers on the tablecloth. Both of them turned slightly toward the door at the sound of small feet. Emmy looked at Susannah. She looked at her father. She looked at Susannah again, with the absolute seriousness of a 6-year-old arriving at a conclusion. Emmy said it plainly. "Mama." It was the first time. It came out simply, without ceremony, the way children say the truest things, as a statement of fact that they have already decided, requiring only the occasion to speak aloud. Susannah looked at Marcus. The morning light was on his face, and he was looking back at her with an expression she had no old name for. She had not, in 38 years, been given occasion to learn the name for this particular expression on a person's face when they looked at her. Neither of them spoke. Emmy climbed into her chair, arranged herself with the businesslike efficiency of a child who has said what needed saying, and considers the matter settled and looked expectantly at the bread basket. "Toast?" Emmy said. "Please." Susannah reached for the basket. Her hand was steady. Outside the windows, the Stonecross Park lay under the October light, the trees copper and gold, the walled garden beyond them holding its quiet, the morning opening in all directions, like something that had been waiting a long time to begin.